Welcome to Lies the Truth podcast. We are obviously not in the studio tonight. We are in Krakow, Poland, and I am still your host, Pastor Mark Bedwell, and this is your other host.
My name is Kim.
And she's my wife. But we have been on a 13-day trip.
13 days.
Through Europe. Started in Berlin and ended in Krakow, and tomorrow we'll go back home. And so we just thought in this episode that we would spend some time sharing some things with you that maybe we experienced, we learned, and maybe even a couple of fun things about the trip. And so Kim's going to lead us off, and we're going to kind of walk through some of the cities that we've been through. And I think she's going to start talking about Berlin and maybe we were there for a few days. What experience stood out to you in Berlin?
Yeah, so we started our journey and we were in Berlin for a couple days by ourselves before our group joined us. But it was shocking to me. Number one, it was a beautiful city. But two, there were memorials everywhere.
Yeah.
Memorials, World War II, for those that were killed, the marginalized. And it was just incredible to see and think about a town that was so central to such horrific things, and just all of the memorials, and yet still people just walk right by. I think it's taken for granted. It's forgotten. History's
lost, it seems like, on a lot of people. And for us, it was fresh because we had not seen this and had not been walking through the grave sites that they put up in honor of the Jews, and then the memorials in honor of the homosexuals that were killed during World War II, or the gypsies, or just different things that we saw. There was so much evil.
There was a lot of evil. Another thing is just with all of the memorials, where the walls stood, there was always some sort of different type of cobblestone that marked where the wall was. And just to think of the families that for nearly 30 years were separated from each other during
because
that
of the
time.
Berlin Wall, the West Germany, and even I didn't realize that even the city of Berlin was separated. So it wasn't just West Germany, East Germany, but there was actual separation in Berlin.
Yeah, it was such an education for, I think, both of us. And just even understanding the four quadrants of Berlin, and you had the Soviets and the French and the U.S. and the Germans, and just that history. I think so much history is lost on us. And so, it really challenged me to really dig in. And I love historical fiction. So I get a little bit of it, but it's not real history. Like, I get the atmosphere from historical fiction, but I need to do a lot more studying, I think.
Well, and then for me, I texted Shelby, our daughter, and she said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Well, it's a beautiful city. We're having fun, but it's also very sad." And she said, "Why is it sad?" And then my response was, I sent her a picture that we saw through glass. The picture was through a plate of glass, and it showed empty bookcases. And it was a reminder of when this all began, when he began to burn all the books. And it was a memorial of that. So even her asking, like, why sad? It's just, we just forget. But we're reminded of the depths that evil can take.
Absolutely. And when you think about the books, there was a concerted effort to erase history, right?
Yeah.
And it's not even necessary because we forget history ourselves, even with all the memorials. So I think that's kind of where this, there was such an effort to do what happens to us as people naturally. We've got such short memories. And that's just such a dangerous thing. And so it really challenged me, I think. So after we left Berlin, we went to Wittenberg. So we really kind of started our Luther tour, the Luther Trail, really. And so talk to me, like, what you found interesting or what you learned in Wittenberg.
She's talking about Martin Luther, and the cool thing about following Martin Luther was we happened to be in Europe during when I guess we celebrate, called Reformation Day, is the day where Luther, however he posted his 95 Theses, that's a joke that you had to be on this trip with. However that happened would have been October 31st, and we were here during that, which then leads into All Saints Day, which may be a memory we also bring to. But just that we began this tour of Martin Luther, and we began it in Wittenberg, with the very church where he would have attended when he was in his first monastery there, and with other students. He would have been there. This was the church that he was attending. And it was the church that, whether he posted the theses on the door or he had them distributed, however that happened on October 31st, this was the place. And so just not only the marking of the Martin Luther story, but then right off the bat, we recognized this was bigger than a Martin Luther story, because even at the beginning, if it wasn't for the person in town who had the printing press and who was able to distribute everything that he was writing, it wouldn't have went anywhere. I mean, Wittenberg was a small town, and this thing would not have traveled far at all. But it was immediately that the man with these thoughts had an opportunity, and somebody who was willing and able to get them out to the masses. And so that was a big part. I think, to me, the biggest thing in Wittenberg is the pivoting. It really isn't about Luther at all. It's about, we had this great day planned in Wittenberg. We were going to see the door. We were going to walk the streets. And it was not only raining cats and dogs, but it was raining cats and dogs. And it was like 25 degrees.
Cold, windy.
So there was no walking the town. Nobody was there. It was like we were in a ghost town.
Ghost town.
And and so we kind of was like, ugh. And so we ended up being inside this restaurant, and we're just going to hunker down and eat a meal. And that's pretty much it for the day. But it's interesting how, like, sometimes when the unexpected happen, great unexpected things happen. So
Amazing.
Kim, we're eating lunch. What happened during lunch that you think is unexpected but wonderful?
We are just minding our own business in this cute German authentic restaurant. And all of a sudden, it was this sound of about 15 men just breaking out into this a cappella, all parts, beautiful harmonies, beautiful harmonies, these songs. And I mean, it took over. I mean, it filled this restaurant with the sounds that they were making.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand a word that they said, but it was phenomenal.
It was not only phenomenal, but it ended up getting us engaged with them. And we kidded around and asked them to sing Amazing Grace. I don't know that they understood what we were saying, but it just was a reminder of the beauty of music and the power of music. And these men just loved music so much. And it took what was a wet and rainy, and this is not the day we thought it was going to be, and ended up being probably one of my favorite memories of the trip, even though it was unplanned.
Talk about worship service that morning. That was our first Sunday there.
The worship service that morning, it was our first Sunday there, and we experienced a full German worship service. And luckily, Kim knows some German, and Kim was raised Lutheran, so she was a little more used to all of the books being used. And so it was really interesting for me. She really understood what was going on more than I did, but I really tried to participate, even though I couldn't understand what they were saying. But Kim would use her fingers to, like, kind of walk through the words that they were singing or that we were quoting. And even though we didn't understand the language, the reverence of the people, the beautiful music, again, that they had their orchestra that they were using, but you could just tell there was such a reverence for God in that place. And that's kind of lost in a lot of churches. And I'll even admit that. And I don't think we enter church or the worship centers are even as reverent as you get into these beautiful buildings, and it just makes you think of God. So I just thought it was a great morning of worship.
So we left Wittenberg and we went then to a town called Eisleben. This is where Martin Luther was born. He was baptized and he died. The dying and the being born, totally unrelated. It's not like he went back home to die. He was journeying back when he just happened to fall sick and pass away in this town. But we continued our education about Luther, I think, in Eisleben. The birthplace, the death, they call it the death house, which but the church where he was baptized, he was baptized when he was 1 day old. We really I was kind of taken aback, actually, because our tour guide was wonderful, very educational, but he was very real. And I appreciate that. I mean, I think a lot of times, we elevate people like Luther, like Knox, like
Calvin,
Calvin, yeah.
Spurgeon.
All of these kind of greats of Reformation. But to be totally honest, Luther was um, very very outspoken.
He wrote some really bad
Oh,
things and thought some really bad
really,
things about
really.
Jewish people, and we're not necessarily taught that in our religious circles. And I wasn't the only pastor who was kind of taken back. And it started with on the outside of the church, a cornerstone that was showing some very disrespectful things about Jewish people. And then the more we read and the more we went through museums, we realized this isn't just something that, this is something that is very real. Yeah.
Very real, very real. And and about that kind of there's this, like you said, this placard, this sculpture really kind of laid into the corner of this church. And I was doing some research, and there's been multiple attempts to get that taken down. And they've never been successful at it. And and it's kind of one of those things that I've kind of a little bit mixed feelings about it. It's so horrific that it's there, but at the same time, it's history, and we don't want to forget. And again, it's that, do we erase history? So just
It's very mixed feelings, but all of a sudden, I think what is happening, at least in my heart, is we have a tendency to put, and I'm a pastor, so I understand this, is you have to be very careful about putting men of God, pastors,
Yes.
anybody on a pedestal.
Absolutely.
Because we're all human, and especially in history, when history has time to look back on your life and look through all the closets, and you realize that everybody, the Bible says nobody is perfect, but if you put your heroes on pedestals, they are going to fall, and it is going to hurt you. So it's just a great reminder that Luther did so much for the Reformation, but he was human, and he had things about him that...
Anytime we're not pointing to God, anytime we're not pointing to Jesus, when we are trying to elevate people, we're going to fail. We're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part.
Well, and even today, we talked about this conversation a little bit with our friend Robert, who's a pastor here in Krakow. And he was just like, oh, you didn't read the book before about that Luther wrote? And I was like, no, didn't read the book, didn't know about the book. And but he said he was very aware of the thoughts that at some point in his life, later in his life, that Luther had about Jewish people. But yeah, so that was tough.
Yeah.
That was tough, but it was a lesson learned.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we left Eisleben, and we went to Erfurt. So what stood out to you about Erfurt? There was where he went to seminary, right?
Okay. So she has to remind me of these places because she's much better with where we were in the cities. I just would have said Germany. We were in a city in Germany. But this was probably the place where God spoke to me most, is when we were in the seminary in Erfurt. And I think one for me is, I'm not really good when it's like, this isn't the real thing, this is a replica of the real thing. But when you're in a place that's the real thing, these are the real stained glass windows that these Augustinian monks put in these windows, and here's what they meant when they put them in. You have my attention at that. I want to see authentic stuff, and so I'm already bought in because everything there is still there.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop, and we'll pick up this conversation when we come back together the next time.